I'm delighted to welcome you back to our digital series in Equitable Recovery. Today's guest is Baroness Camilla Cavendish of Little Italy.
We don't like being on our own, and many people have suffered enormously in this situation because they have been stuck, many young people particularly, in small apartments on their own, communicating by Zoom with very little infrastructure around them. I've been working with a lot of them because I work with a lot of young people in the government, and it's been really tough. And actually I think that sense of community, of relying more on your neighbour, on the neighbour that you never notice. Your point about cities are anonymous. Many of us love cities because we like to be anonymous. That is over. We have all got to know our neighbours. We have every street. We will never pass those people in the street again without acknowledgement because we have got to know those people. And I think that is phenomenally powerful, and I hope we can build on it for the future.
So you're optimistic?
I'm deeply optimistic, but that's because you have to be optimistic in this kind of situation. I mean, we are living through such turmoil and such uncertainty. In England, we created a system called NHS volunteers.
That's the National Health Service.
Yes. In Britain, the government asked people, will you come and volunteer for the NHS to help deliver groceries, deliver prescription medicines to people? It put out the call on a Monday. By Wednesday, it had 750,000 people signed up.
Wow.
Because there wasn't enough for those people to do. And the Prime Minister was saying, we've got all these people signed up and they're not being given enough to do. The reason they weren't being given enough to do was because not only had they volunteered, but every second person in their village and their street was already helping the elderly neighbour and picking up the shopping and doing the prescriptions. And there was this kind of extraordinary outpouring of community support. And that was really unexpected and really inspiring. And it brought the age groups together and it brought the income groups together. And excellent. I just think we need to make sure that endures after the crisis.
Yes. And before we finish, how is Boris?
Well, I can't tell you that. He obviously, he's one of the only world leaders to have got COVID and got it really badly. So he was in intensive care in hospital. He had a sort of near-death experience. And I think it did change his attitude in several ways. He went from being a liberal who was extremely reluctant to impose restrictions on people to being a leader who was much more concerned to lock down. And we're just going through a new wave of this in Britain right now. He also, though, became much more conscious of something you and I have talked about, which is health inequalities. Yes. And in his case, he actually came out and said, I'm fat and I need to lose weight and we all need to lose weight in this crisis. And that was brilliant because it took someone at that level to admit that he had his own particular health problem and that he was struggling with it, to really connect with people. And this is a man who has never been interested before, particularly in health or health inequalities. So that was quite impressive. But look, he has a lot on his plate. The trade-offs, balancing the trade-offs between health and jobs is not getting any easier in this crisis.
Yeah, we have the same problem in the US. Now, I mentioned in my introduction that he has brought you back into the fold at Downing Street to help advise on some very important reforms at the NHS, National Health Service. And your tactic is to try and converge health concerns with social care. Can you speak a little bit to your work with the Prime Minister and how you envision that to unfold?
I work for the Department of Health in that part of the UK government on this, and what I'm trying to do is look at, as you said, social care, which in every country, including the US and UK, is not publicly funded. It is what happens when you get older and you need help with washing or dressing or you can't be independent anymore. And that means residential care and care homes, and it means people going in home care in homes. And there are 1.6 million people in that workforce who for years and years have been overlooked. And what we did many years ago in many of our societies is that we parceled up all these tasks and we subdivided them into the cheapest cost, and we handed them out. And the result is that if you're an 80-year-old man living in Vermont, let's say, you might see 30 different faces in a month. You don't see the same person, because we've managed brilliantly to subdivide health from care, and then we've subbed everything. So the most junior person can't give you an insulin injection. That can only be done by somebody more senior. And we've built hierarchies, and we've built costs, endless costs of transaction into this system. And the result is that we have a workforce who really care about looking after people, but they're not allowed to do their job because they're told you can only spend 15 minutes with that person. And they're not allowed to actually spend the time that is needed to really build relationships. We've reduced care to something very mechanical. And care is actually not just about getting somebody out of bed. It is about giving that person confidence to get back on their feet. It's about building networks of family and neighbors around them and all those good things. And many countries in Europe are better at this than Britain is at the moment. So one of the things I'm trying to do is look at that workforce and how we can get back to a concept of caring for the whole person and letting one or two members of staff care for the whole person. And what that means is that you give staff more autonomy and more judgment, because in fact, some of these people have 20, 30 years of experience, but they're still being told, you can only spend 15 minutes on Monday, 15 minutes on Wednesday. But those people know far better what's actually needed. And many of the experiments around the world have shown that, in fact, we can look after people better and it doesn't cost any more money. So one of the things I'm looking at is how can we boost the morale of that workforce and recognize the real skills they have and let them actually care for people so that we can all have a better old age.
So back in my day, social care was delivered primarily through the councils. So is part of your remit to try and get sort of the second layer of service providers, aka the councils, involved in the process? So whatever you come up with by way of recommendations will have their buy-in. Is that part of?
Oh, sure. So the councils, it's so ideal. I talk to the health people, the medics, the councils, and then all the private businesses that actually provide the care. The councils are intermediate. So yeah, there's a whole complex ecology of people who are involved in this. And as always, you know, the pioneers are getting it right. The pioneers, many of the pioneering councils are the ones that in the crisis said, hang on, we've got to get the hospitals to help the care homes with the protective personal equipment. You know, we've got to join up the landscape rather than have it separately. And actually, one of the positive things that has come out of the crisis is greater collaboration within our health system. Our health system, despite it being free, is extremely subdivided. And, you know, surgeons have specialized, so they kind of only look at, you know, one part of your knee, for heaven's sake. I mean, this is where we are now in the world. We need the geriatrician who looks at the whole person. And so the specialists who look at the whole person are coming back into center stage right now. And we've realized that we need to collaborate across disciplines, because when you have someone who's really ill with COVID, if they're lucky enough to recover, many of them will have months and months and months of recovery period. That means intensive rehabilitation. That means a whole series of things that makes us change the way that we help those people.
So the Prime Minister has a huge majority in Parliament, as you know. What can possibly stop you?
Oh, well, I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, you know, that it's about priorities. What I'm working on is the medium term. And it's always dangerous to work on the medium term for governments, because governments mostly can only look at tomorrow. So the medium term for us is about 6 months' time. What will stop us is money. It's always money. We are living at a time when governments are borrowing. The state is growing bigger than it's been, you know, since the Second World War. The debt levels are unsustainable. There is no spare money. So the way to get these proposals through is to make very, very sure that they're actually value for money and efficient. And my argument, which is partly about, as I said, giving care workers and junior healthcare staff more autonomy, sometimes makes people fear that we're going to spend a lot of money. And if you go to Mrs. Jones and say, what do you need? Instead of just giving her 15 minutes, you're terrified that she's going to come up with a massively long shopping list. Mrs. Jones actually doesn't come up with a massively long shopping list. She actually says, I don't need all these visits. What I need is, to be able to actually see my friend twice a week. But it's a difficult story to tell in government as to actually that if you give people more autonomy, you might save money in the long term.
Well, that's the UK. And before I close, I want to ask you one final question. And you have the luxury of 3,500 miles of Atlantic Ocean to sort of see from afar what's happened in the US. And we're going through a presidential election. We have major social issues, major divisions, even within families, because of the divisions that we've seen in the last few years. As someone who has an American mother who travels here a lot, what's your take on what's happening in the United States?
I'm very sad about the States. I love the States. I feel it's my second home, and I feel it was a land of opportunity. My mother grew up there, but my parents also lived in New York and LA for 10 years of the 50s, and they went there because it was the American dream. It was the land of opportunity, which at that time Britain really was not.
That's right.
America back then really was a place of social mobility. It was a place where you really could climb the ladder and hard work paid off. And what I think I regret is that we've had almost 30 years now in the States where that has not been true and blue collar wages have stagnated. And that's not just about the current administration in the White House. That is a long-term trend that I think we didn't take enough notice of. And I actually think, whoever wins the election, there has to be a revolution in America in terms of some of the welfare benefits you have. I think universal healthcare is a phenomenally powerful thing.
Yes.
And if you could introduce that, it would be wonderful. I understand all the concerns about taxes and so on, but to remove the daily concern that people have about whether they can pay their health insurance would be a phenomenal thing to do for almost everyone. And I think it would be quite bonding. But I do think, I think there are deep, deep divisions in America, and they're not going to be papered over in one presidential term. I think this is a long-term thing. But I do think America still needs to take the role of global leadership. And I regret that it has been retrenching during the Obama years as well. America has become increasingly reluctant to take on the big fights in the world. Trump talks a lot about China, but it's not clear what his real policy will be. I suspect that if Biden gets in, his policy will be fairly similar towards China, and he will want to take a tough line, and that is right, because what we have rising in China is an authoritarian regime which really does believe that it can produce a very strong economy while repressing freedoms. And that is a very, very dangerous thing to have in the world, and we need a strong America to stand up to that. And if we have a strong America, the rest of us can come in behind that. But we need that leadership in the world.
Well, Baroness Camilla Cavendish of Little Italy, thank you so much for the time today. I really enjoyed the conversation.